Oh, well, welcome to the No Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name's Tim Wade.
And my name is Joe Augustine. It's been a while since we've been on the air, but we're back for another season. I'm not sure which one it is, but we're back, which is a good thing,
Yeah.
I guess.
Well, it's third year anniversary. I think we started. They just had the anniversary of the end of the exodus of Americans from Afghanistan, which is when we started.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, happy
3
anniversary then, I
years.
guess.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well,
we're still going.
congratulations to us and everybody listening.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone listening. So I
Yeah.
think, Tim, you've got an X permission that you've got to give. I think that's what that box is. Yeah, but it's been a few months since we were on the air, and I've moved countries back to Singapore, so we're now all in the same country. What have you guys been up to the last few months?
Oh, wow, that's a long thing. We're trying to make a short show happen, but there was, the last season was interrupted by certain medical emergencies in our family. Those have quietened down a little bit, and we're sort of like at home right now with home care. Our number two, I have to keep track of them, is now convalescing in bed. She's got to be in bed for most of the rest of her life, but she's in good form. So we're quite happy about things.
That's good news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were all very worried back then.
And you've had a
Yeah.
big move.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've got to give you some credit, Andrea. You're the only person who's ever canceled a show on me. It was for my own good.
Yeah, you were going to go ahead. I'm like, no. I'm sure your wife appreciated it.
Yeah, well, I think she still manages to find something wrong with that because it wasn't, after all, my choice in the end. For a bit of background, basically, we it's gonna sound really flippant here, but there was a surgery during the time of the last show, and I was gonna be doing the show instead of
While being
I guess
operated on.
keeping vigil. No, not while being operated on, but keeping vigil in the hospital. But I'm one of those overly pragmatic people who thinks there's nothing much more you can do. You might as well do something productive. And I thought that doing the show would have been, yeah.
Yeah, you might need to have a chat to my husband about appropriate behavior in certain circumstances. He's pretty good at it.
I mean, there is
Yeah.
something about presence, even though it's not productive. There's something
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
presence that's very powerful.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I've just been studying. That's all I've been doing. So over to you. You've had a big move.
Oh, it's been horrendous. Just every move's bad. As you get older, they get worse. But it's the 9th international move, which if anyone's ever done an international move knows exactly how painful it is. But at least we're coming home, right? So, I lived in Singapore for 17 years before we left, so it's not new. But we're out in the sticks, out near Changi Airport, which is very different to how we used to live, but I'm loving it. It's a beautiful community out here. Lots of birds. Saw a hornbill yesterday when I was out on a bike ride. Got rid of the car. The number one thing you could do to be environmentally aware is get rid of your car. And I know, Joe, you need your car for your daughter, but no, it's good. We're not settled yet. It'll take time, but we're happy to be here.
Sweet.
Yeah. Well, welcome back.
It's good to be back.
Yeah, welcome back.
Should we?
Well, I guess it's a good time to welcome back the audience as well. Thank you so much for picking us up again. I know we've got some new people who are joining us today, wondering what all this is about. Well, the No Show is a show that starts out every time trying to be a short show, and almost every time we end up running long. And it's partly because of this. We're going to get sidetracked along the way. And there's a lot of sidetracking to happen this time around as well, because there's been so much that's happened since the last time around. I try and describe the No Show to friends. It's basically a kind of a cheat sheet if you'd like to be more interesting at the next dinner conversation, so that you actually know about some of the stuff that perhaps went by you that wasn't on Instagram.
It's Chat JAT.
Chat JAT. There you go.
Nice. Yeah. Well, so should we start with some big breaking news?
Yeah, this one shocking.
Well, hang on. This technically speaking, it's breaking non-breaking news, right? Something like that.
It is non-breaking news.
I know, but it's a reflection of our time. So it broke this week that Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, I think that's how you say his surname, are breaking up on the 28th of September. Turns out it's a fake story, but a whole PR plan was put in place, and it looks like it was some agency connected to the whatever the team, the Chiefs or whoever he plays for. So somebody's gotten up to no good, and yeah, they're looking into it. So anyway, pay attention to that. Apparently, Taylor finds the whole thing quite amusing, but it is a reflection of the world that we live in, right? What captures people's attention, because it's very grim out there. The news is very grim, and
I was quite surprised by the intricacies that went into it, and I thought it was quite clever as well. I mean, the way it was done. For those of you who don't know the details, essentially what was leaked was a document by the sports management team that was looking after the men and the relationship, and it was a plan to deal with the whole breakup and everything else. But anyone who basically, I think, spent some time reading some of the details, that you could actually make out vaguely in the photographs. These were all like spy secret phone photographs and stuff. It seems that you would have been able to work out that it really wasn't the real thing. But most people don't go as far as to check it all out. They just look at the headline and they go like, okay, that's the logo, that's the story, I'm forwarding this.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the problem that we've got. We saw it during the Olympics. There was a lot of sensational stories coming out.
Yeah.
So the opening ceremony was a classic for me, right? Just from a logical perspective, the idea that an Italian event was going to be at the French Olympics, where there was an alternative opportunity, which was a Greek event and a big dinner party with Dionysus, just from a logical perspective made sense to me. And I know some people, no matter what you say, they still believe that it was heresy, or no, not heresy. What's the word? When you come on, you guys know the word. When you say something against religion,
blasphemy.
That's the word. Heresy, blasphemy. Thank you.
Tim, where are you when we need you, man?
Yeah.
Well, I disagree with Andrea on this one.
Okay, cool. But just from a logical perspective, it's an Olympic ceremony. They're going to talk about either the French or they're going to talk about the Greeks, because that's what the Olympics is all about. But it was an instant reaction.
Yeah.
So you're one of the ones that think it's what it was reported as.
Well, I mean, yeah, because look, Dionysus he's the god of wine, but he was also the god. There was a article it wasn't LGBT at the time, it was GLBT at the time, many years ago, about somebody talking about how he was a sort of a patron god of transsexuals and etc. So that he was there was interesting. That the setup was, and I know there's artwork of Dionysus having big feasts and everything else, but the artwork of Dionysus's feasts are always people around the table. The Last Supper image is very much on the other side of the table, and I've got two perspectives on this. I do have a perspective as an actor, which is a different perspective as a perspective as a Christian. I just thought it was in poor taste. It was a swipe opportunity. I felt that just didn't need to be there. If you're a PR firm, it's the greatest thing ever because everyone's talking about the Olympics. But I just think it wasn't tastefully done for a huge section of the world's population that could get offended by that. And I know that everyone wants to get offended at the top of the hat at the drop of a pin these days. And I think that the people who are loudest in their offense are going to be loud in anything.
Yeah.
And a lot of the Christians were, I saw one of the responses over here from a senior Christian going, "Why like that? That was the original." And then he wrote the article afterwards going, "Well, let's just be kind, turn the other cheek," all that sort of stuff. And I'm like, okay, but I just felt the same as him. Why like that? Why do you have to, did you need to take a swipe if you were taking a swipe? And if anybody looked at it, you might think, maybe this might offend someone because it does look a little bit like Last Supper. She's standing there with the heart. There's a lot of artwork with the I know that's a heart everywhere, but it was here, and there was the bit like that, which was very much like the halo. But as an actor, had somebody said to me in my 20s, would you like to be in this? We're going to do this thing that could be anything, whatever it is, and it's going to be in the Olympics, I would have gone, sure. And then I would have stood there like they told me to stand there, and I would have been doing my movementy things or whatever they were doing. And I probably would have done it and then come away a few years later going, thinking about it. But as an actor, I probably would have, I would have. So I got nothing against the people who are acting in it. I have more against the people who thought that this would be a good idea to put in front of billions of people, a significant proportion of which are Christians, and a proportion of them may get very, very offended. And if the whole thing is about acceptance and tolerance and unity and togetherness, and the world is one and everybody is included, then taking a swipe, or not taking a swipe, but doing something that very obviously looks like it's taking a swipe to those people who may get offended, would be regarded as insensitive and intolerant. But it just seems to be that way. So I can understand both sides of the argument, but I don't, and I can understand both sides of the argument. I just don't accept people digging in their heels to accept and push forward only one side of the argument. So I'm trying to see both sides of the argument, and I'm not going to go, they're ridiculous because they're doing this and it's not about them. Because if the whole postmodern thing about opinion and truth and everything else is they're feeling offended, then we need to acknowledge that they're feeling offended. And so rather than go, you're just being stupid for feeling offended. What's the matter with you? I mean, that's I don't see that as the way forward. So yeah.
Well, I found the whole thing a little bit of a. I'll be honest about that. I maybe wasn't watching as closely as everyone should have as well. But I felt it's one of those things that was launched to be over the heads of many people, and I think it did kind of sail over the heads of many people until other people said that, hey, wait a minute, that's not supposed to happen that way. This is why you should be upset, and then people got together and got upset. So I
do agree with you.
We all sides of the story and go like, okay, yes, it's someone being tongue in cheek, and that basically is what I mean. It's supposed to be something that is a bit, stimulating as well. So you're pushing the limits and you're saying something and you're winking. It's not overtly saying it, but what I think sometimes people do is that there's fruit that's being dangled and going, okay, well, here's something that's kind of in the area of maybe you could get offended by that, and they go like, yes, I'll take that, thank you very much. And then you process it and give it to everybody. Here, everybody has some of this angriness that anger, I think is a better word, but have some of this disgruntled dish that I prepared for you,
Well, luckily Australia came to the fore and removed any interest in that opening ceremony and focused everything on breakdancing. So that was great.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I do think there's one more important point here. So apart from the logic perspective of Greek versus Italian in an Olympics, the other thing was
France.
The Italian Last Supper versus the Greek Dionysus. But the other thing was how the French responded to the criticism. So I actually think initially, and for quite a significant period of time, they didn't really say anything. They didn't confirm or deny. They didn't really do anything. And I actually think culturally they just kind of sat there and went, what the hell's all the ruckus about? Like, it didn't even sort of cross their mind. So when you sort of said, the people that designed the show, I don't think they designed to offend. I think they designed because they thought it was a great show. And I don't think anyone was prepared for the backlash, and therefore they didn't respond from a PR perspective, which meant that the story wasn't squashed faster. So it got to ruminate longer. But I agree with you. Like, I had some private conversations with some people I've known for many years who are very devout Catholics, and very, very respectful, and they weren't changing their mind. And I'm like, it's all right. I got respect for that. But it was an example. And of course, the female boxers that had the extra Y chromosomes or X chromosomes, that whole conversation, how that was so big and so quick, and people didn't step back and say, wait a minute, what's the real story here? And that's what we've got to do, because we're feeding in to the news operating the way it's doing, which is destructive for society and democracy. Yeah. So we've got to step back. We've got to take time. We've got to be patient. We've got to, there's some big breaking news stories. Let's start with the first one. So,
okay.
The United States Department of Justice has revealed that 2 Russian television employees have been indicted for covertly funding and directing a US company that published thousands of videos in furtherance of Russia's interests. So that's the big story this week. The US company that's named in the media, not in the indictment, is called Tenet Media. And
Oh,
they
sorry, I
have
thought Fox.
yeah, no. Well, they think this is just the tip of the iceberg, but it's people like Benny Johnson, Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, and Lauren Southern. They've got millions of followers, and they claim that they didn't know that they were being used as Russia propagandist tools. And by claiming that, it makes them useful idiots, which is a term that's being used. And, this propaganda thing that's been going on, it's been going on for more than a decade. And from a Russian perspective, it's a hell of a lot cheaper and a lot quicker than recruiting spies into high positions where they can get secret information. That they're existing on the platforms created by Americans. They're infiltrating into those platforms and they're sowing division and confusion, and it's working, and it's working beautifully. And years ago, I said we've been in World War III with Russia for a long time, but it's information warfare. And to me, it's just, just another example of it. So have either of you had a chance to catch up on that story? Because it's gone over in the last couple of days. It's pretty new.
Yeah. Well, for me, this is not this isn't new. It's just basically just revealing the masks or revealing who's behind the masks, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you think about the way it's been happening for the longest time already, we've always known someone somewhere is doing it. This is basically just saying, okay, and now the spotlight is on you too. But of course, it isn't really on them, right? I mean, they're just the two mice that we found. And again, it doesn't go all the way back to the snake's head, so we'll see. I'm curious to see where this goes, but I like the idea that we at least bring it out into the open, and then at least some of the impact is going to be that people are a bit more careful, or at least just for a while, going to be a bit more careful. Not the consumers, but the people who are the people involved, like media companies. If they receive something to be distributed or to be put out, at least they might think a little bit more about where and how these things were derived.
Yeah. So these guys were being paid $400,000 a month for these videos, right? So that's already an alarm bell, because the average influencer doesn't earn that much. But there's one piece that's come out that I think is thoughtful in the Atlantic, and it's called The Russian Propaganda Attack on America. So the significant thing here from a Justice Department perspective is most of these stories break after elections when they're talking about interference, whereas this one's broken before. So that's a significant difference. So basically what this Atlantic piece is saying, what's really going on here is that the Russians have identified 2 major weaknesses in their American adversaries. The first is that a big slice of the American public, especially since the ascent of Donald Trump and the MAGA movement, has an almost limitless appetite for stories that jack up their adrenaline. They will embrace wild conspiracies and news meant to generate social conflict so long as the stories are exciting, validate their pre-existing worldviews, and give them some escape from life's daily doldrums. The other is that more than a few Americans have the combination of immense greed and ego-driven grievances that make them easy targets either for recruitment or to be used as clueless dupes. The Russians, along with every other intelligence service in the world, because Iran and China is also being named, count on finding such people and exploiting their avarice and insecurity. It's not new, the US does it, but the widespread influence of social media has opened a new front in the intelligence battle. So it's a really interesting story. It's an interesting perspective. It's something that we've known about. But I suppose what continues to surprise me is how captured so many of the population are by these messages. So that's the thing that always surprises me, because it's not in their interest.
Yeah, I just wanted to also point out that when you hear about these things, especially when you introduce the topic, right, it does sound a lot like we're talking about one side. It's both sides. It's not just people on one side of the fence. It's people on both sides of the divide that are being divided even further And that's the real crazy thing about this. Actually, we're going to talk about the war in Ukraine later on, but that's exactly the kind of stuff that the people who are interested in this information don't want you to figure out that something is wrong for sure. They just want you to be unsure.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to the war, because there's a few worth mentioning. But I did a search for Ukraine. So usually, my weekend reads, there's regular sort of whatever's going on in the world, Ukraine, Gaza, all the different wars and civil wars. But the really interesting thing is, if you do a search for news on the Ukraine war, what came up was Russia is winning, or Ukraine is winning. Russia doesn't have enough troops left, or Ukraine doesn't have enough troops left. There's not enough weapons on one side, there's not enough weapons on the other side. It is, from a media perspective, it is a really, really confusing war to understand, because nobody's winning. There's no winner out of this war. Like, I can't see a win. Can you? So what do you guys, Joe, continue with what you were thinking about Ukraine there?
Well, no, this okay, when we talk about war, it's always about, like every side says we control the information, or we try to control the information, and there is you can only, from your side of things, you always have to say you're winning, right? I mean, that's always the way war is won, is that there's enough belief on one side to make it ultimately true. So in that way, this is what's happening. Both sides are waging a war of propaganda. Ukraine is also keeping foreign media out of places they don't want people to have a sense of things. They call it, under the guise of military secrecy and strategic, for strategic reasons, they're going to keep you out of this area. In the end, this is also about being able to hold those cards close to yourself and saying, okay, well, this is what we say. Oh, no one else to say otherwise. Okay, we're right. So both sides playing the game. That there is a lot of evidence, though, that there's an inflow of military power in terms of military equipment into both sides, being supported from both sides, right? We've got the West coming to the Ukraine's aid, but you've also got the shipments of arms from other countries to the Russian side as well. So there is something happening there. I think the arms dealers are winning.
Yeah, and the banks.
And the banks.
Yeah.
The people who are losing are the people at the front line. I was talking to a missionary who'd gone out there to try and help the people at the front line, and there's a lot of people in crumbled homes. Their husbands a lot of women. Their husbands have gone off to fight, and they haven't seen them. There's groups of battalions of like 60-year-olds and above who are angry that they don't want to have to do it, but there's women lined up to get abortions because the husband's gone, the place is a wreck, they got a baby, they don't know how to take care of it. It's horrific. What is the human cost that we don't see? We're just looking at who's going to win this. Well, we do look at the human cost. I mean, we're not blind to it, but we're not close to it either. And we hear those stories, but then we go, well, what can we do? But some people are out there trying to help, but they can help in only small ways. But the people that were there that received them were just so grateful that somebody came to see how they were, just to touch base, even though they couldn't do very much. And they're trying to support people as well as they can, but it's tough, and it must be tough on both sides at the front line for both of them feeling it. So it's the normal people that are the ones that are hurting all the time, while big greed and power hungry politics just causes destruction.
Yeah. There's no place for war anymore. Not in the world that we're in right now. We've always handled the war in Gaza quite delicately, ever since it started. But the suffering of the Palestinians and the numbers of deaths are a lot higher than we're hearing. So I was looking at numbers 100,000, 200,000 in a report the other day, and that's very different to the 40,000 that we're hearing on a regular basis. We're seeing the complete destruction of Gaza, and now the West Bank has been brought into the war. It's a genocide before our eyes, and the media are playing a very one-sided role in this. And you're starting to understand the power of the Israelis worldwide, I think, the way they work. But in the last week, the Israelis are on their feet. We saw six of those hostages die who could have survived if Netanyahu signed the peace agreement, and he didn't. And I'm seeing that even our Israeli friends who were speaking up against for Israel at the beginning of the war are starting to say it's enough. It's a terrible, terrible situation, and the escalation potential from this war is it's almost too much to think about. But we're still on this path. So, what about you guys? Have you changed the way you're thinking about it?
Well, the way I think about it isn't terribly popular in terms of how I look at stuff and what I understand about war. I mean, if you look at what needs to happen, both sides are essentially playing the same game and basically want eradication, right? There is it's not the eradication of the people per se, right? I mean, if I just take a step back and say, what is your objective? One side wants to eradicate the combatants who are amongst all those other people, and the other side just wants to get rid of all the people, right? And both sides are playing a game, and they're both trying to play a game that is based not completely on just the weapons, not completely based on just who's on the ground here, but also based on sentiment in terms of the world influence and stuff like that as well. So it's challenging because when we look back historically at war, I'm not going to say that war is ever a good thing, but if you look back at how war is won so that it can lead to regrowth and a restart, it does start with almost complete destruction. That's kind of where you have to go to say, okay, right, look, this completely doesn't make sense. It has to stop making sense from one side to go like, you know what, okay, let's stop, let's do it, let's just give in, right? And like World War II at least for Japan wouldn't have stopped as easily as people kind of imagine it would have. People, through history, they think about the atomic bomb and think that that's what really kind of stopped everything. It was the full stop that finally brought the war to a halt. But before that, America had firebombed much of Japan. Most of the major cities had been firebombed, and it wasn't going to stop because the Japanese weren't going to surrender. They weren't going to stop the war, and it would have meant that there was going to be this famine and all other kinds of situation that Japan would have brought onto itself because they were running low on resources, but they were still pursuing the war. And one of the most startling stories that for me anyway that I heard was when American philosophers visited Japanese philosophers and to talk about the war in general. This is much later on. The Japanese philosophers actually thanked the Americans for the atomic bombs because they estimated that the bombs had saved millions of Japanese lives. So war it's a bizarre calculation. It's outside of outside what you can do in terms of a decent mind. But it's
so that's a concept of just war, where you are taking an unethical action for a greater outcome. So in universal ethics, it's like you're looking at your consequential ethics, and you're looking at an outcome. So you'll take action that may be unconscionable in the short term for a greater good in the long term, which is what you're saying about the bomb saving millions, hurting a lot, but saving millions. I think the Gaza one seems a bit different, though. I mean, I get your point. You know, if you're fighting a war, you're thinking, I'm going to wipe them out because it's going to save millions. But that sounds like your argument.
Well, I'm not arguing for that, but what I'm saying is that it's about to stop what is the cause of it. And it's again, this is it's one of the, it's a 3-hour coffee, you know, kind of a discussion, right, which ends in a fight. But it's one of those things where, you know, if you're trying, you know, like I think we've done it before in the house when you're trying to find something, right? You end up tearing up the whole house trying to find this one thing, and in the end you get to it, but you've got all this collateral damage. Not the best of my analogies, folks, but it's that kind of thing. There is a task, and there people in the way. But you know, I do see the difference. I can appreciate the difference. I don't like either result, but I do appreciate the difference. So it's time for another solution for sure. We can figure out another solution. I mean, I had a solution which I proposed to somebody, which it was a bizarre idea, right? But I said, what if Israel, instead of spending all the money on bombs, spend the money on Palestinians, right? And said, okay, we're gonna give every Palestinian family a fund based on the number of people you have in your home that is into the millions, right? And it's a fund that basically has one condition, right? You just sue for peace. This is all about peace. Anybody in your family involved in any kind of insurgency, whatever it is, you lose your millions, right? And I thought about that in terms of cost. It might cost less than the war itself. So, and it was one of those ideas. It's impossible to do. You can't. As much as I kind of, to me, I've strong faith that it could work if you really put it out in a if you did the right campaign and what have you, and you really thought about it from an economics perspective, it will work. But it's just politically impossible to do, right? Because you could solve this by giving every single surviving Palestinian right now a couple of $1 million each. It will cost less than the war effort, and you put some conditions on the money. I mean, let's try a good old-fashioned bribe.
Yeah, no, I've for the majority, right? But the extremists in Israel and the extremists in Palestine are they're the problem, right? In both, but one's got more power than the other. But for the extremists, the Hamas extremists, you know, the suffering of their people, are they willing to accept that suffering to achieve a goal?
It's not just the willingness to accept it. It's part of the game plan. You know, it's you know, it's a tick in the KPI box, but not on the side that most of us think it is. It's not on the you know, it's not on the P side. It's I mean, it's on the L side of the P&L. It's on the P side. Suffering, you know.
Yeah, but there's a piece. What's it called? Gaza is hell for aid workers, and it is doubly difficult if you are a woman. And it's a personal story of a woman who's now in Egypt with she got half her family out, the other half are there, and you listen to the story, and you know, to start with, the women were strong. The women are at the center of the family. They're keeping everyone together, and it's a very powerful story about women's role in a war like this, and how, you know, they really are at the center of it. But on the other side, these women have gotten to the point where they've lost it. You know, their mental health, their anxiety, their fear, it's consuming them, and they're not actually able to operate effectively anymore. So the center of a society is crumbling now, which is so destructive. But there's another war that's happening which isn't getting as much attention, and that's the war in Sudan. So it is the largest humanitarian catastrophe. It's home to the world's largest displacement crisis and the world's largest hunger crisis. So there's more than 10 million people, representing 20% of the population, who have been displaced by the fighting. More than half the population, so that's 26 million people, are now facing crisis levels of hunger. Famine is declared in the north of Darfur. And in May, there was a report saying 2.5 million people could die from hunger by this September. So we're in September. So just to step back a bit, 2 decades ago, the world did come together in an effort to save Darfur. And there was a mass mobilization. There were global days for Darfur. The Hollywood actors got behind it. So, it was a big moment. And that's when we heard of the Janjaweed. And they were called the Devils on Horseback. So that became a bit of a household name. So today, it's not just Darfur, it's across the entire country of Sudan, and they believe that it's way worse than it was back then. So it launched 17 months ago. It's a civil war between the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, RSF, which are the Janjaweed rebranded. And so far, they think 18,800 people have been killed, but everyone believes that's a vast undercount, and no one actually knows. Sexual violence is a tool that is being used throughout the country. Both the RSF and the SAF are subjecting women and girls from the age of 9 up to the age of 60 to sexual violence. I found the specific age, very interesting. It is a war crime, sexual violence. But neither of the sides are taking any meaningful steps to prevent it from happening. Healthcare workers are being attacked, and this is a terrible situation. Of course, they're also dealing with extreme weather events, including flooding, which is washing whole villages away at the moment. So that's another one that's not really it's not getting the attention it deserves. So there's some ideas about solving it. Tim, do you want to share those?
Sure. Well, there's a few ideas. First, the world can come together around a call for a civilian protection force, particularly in Darfur. Civil society and rights groups have called for the African Union and the UN to work together to establish one that could, per Human Rights Watch, protect civilians, monitor human rights and international humanitarian law violations, including obstruction of humanitarian aid, and facilitate the safe return of displaced people. Such a mission could help women and girls in particular, and include mobile policing units to focus on locations where people are most at risk. So that is the world coming together and making a decision for protection. Second, the international community must demand that foreign players cease arming Sudan's warring parties. That's going to be a tough one, but because there's so much money in armed conflict, and you stir the pot, you get the armed conflict, you sell your guns, you make your money, but and they're big players there. A UN panel of experts corroborates media reports that the UAE is sending weapons and supplies to the RSF. The UAE has denied these allegations. A July report from Amnesty International found that weapons and ammunition from China, Russia, Serbia, Turkey, Yemen, and the UAE are being imported in large quantities into Sudan. These arms are even flowing into Darfur as aid is being stymied, despite a UN Security Council arms embargo imposed back in 2004. The decades-old initiative should be enforced and expanded to cover the whole of Sudan. And interesting there is the absence of a few big arms players in these reports, which to me sort of doesn't mean that they're not doing it. Anyway. Third, there must be a unified and coordinated peace process involving all relevant stakeholders with the full, equal, meaningful participation of women. Sudan's war has been cursed with an array of peace processes over the last 16 months, but the situation continues to deteriorate, and putting women at the center of peace negotiations can help chart a new way forward that prioritizes civilian rather than military interests. And I can't agree more than getting women involved in it. I've seen it firsthand, not from a war perspective, but from a hunger perspective out in India. I think I mentioned this on the show many years back, but out in India, when we're looking at solving villages in crisis and their hunger and everything else, those villages that only had men on the council tended to make decisions that were based on funding either a speculative gambling to try and solve the problem and get an easy financial win, or alcohol because they were so helpless to solve the problem, or bribery to try and get things happening. Whereas when the women were in the leadership positions on those councils, they were making decisions for infrastructure of the village to help sustainability of food, cooking, education, things, and lighting, sanitation, things like that. They still have to walk a long way to get their water, but it was about drilling wells and things like, rather than paying for negotiating deals with other villages and tribes. So that if you extend it into a peace process, I could see how that would really make sense as well.
Yeah. You don't if you don't include the women, we're just going to keep being in the same boat. I wanted to say hi to Julian Mather and Vicky Coburn in Phuket. She's always been a keen watcher of the show, so hello to both of you. All right, so let's move on to the environment.
Actually, Julian would be a good one to get on the show for his comments, because he was out in a lot of war-torn places.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He's been on the show before.
Yeah.
The environment. So I'm going to give you a quick rundown. We've seen some pretty extreme stuff going on. Do you guys agree that it's getting pretty crazy out there?
It's bloody hot in Singapore.
Mm-hmm. It's actually felt cool for me.
Oh, last couple of days have been cool. Well, yeah, you've come in from boiling Thailand.
Yeah. No, it feels like we're in a calm, cool spot. So October's when it's going to get steamy again. But so this year, just recently, it was reported that 99% of Americans have experienced an extreme weather event. So 99%. And a global survey reports that 88% of people around the world are worried about the state of nature. So we're starting to move into hopefully the right direction. Okay, I just want to look at some of the highlights that have been happening over the last few months, because not everyone is paying as much attention as I am to what's going on. So just the other day, it was reported that Phoenix in Arizona in the United States has hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 38 degrees Celsius, for a record 100th day straight.
What?
Yeah. And this shatters the previous record of 76 days in a row that happened back in 1993. So worldwide, we've seen heat events happening everywhere. We have absolutely no idea how many people have died, and we probably never will. But when we look at how much hotter it was this year than it was the year before, and it's only going to get hotter, we're going to see more and more deaths. But it will always there will always be an undercount. And of course, it's not just humans dying. We're seeing birds, bats, and more. But if you want to think about it from a human perspective, crops are the big risk to us, and the loss of crops, and olive oils, tomatoes, onions, all the basics, wheat, maize, rice, we're losing massive amounts. But in the Sonora Desert, it's so hot that even desert plants known for their resilience are burning and dying in the heat. So that's just heat, and heat has been a big, big story this year. In Brazil, we are seeing extreme wildfires, not just in the Amazon, but in the Pantanal wetlands, which is the world's largest wetlands. Have you heard about the Pantanal? Have you guys heard about it?
No.
Most people only listen to the Amazon. So Brazil's been suffering its driest, hottest, and windiest conditions. So in Sao Paulo state and the Amazon rainforest, they're suffering the worst fire season in decades. More than 3,480 separate fires were recorded in Sao Paulo in August, which is double the number in all of 2023. And in the first 6 months of 2024, the Amazon has had the highest number of fire outbreaks in the last 20 years. And of course, a lot of those fires are started by man to clear land, right? So this is a big thing, because the amount of CO2 that's being released into the atmosphere impacts the whole world. From a drought perspective, we're seeing some really scary stuff going on in Africa. One of the worst droughts in living memory is sweeping across southern Africa, leaving close to 70 million people without enough food and water. If you have an opportunity to read up on what's going on in Zimbabwe there, it's pretty dire. Just this week, Australia in the winter is seeing heat records broken day after day, with the national record for the hottest August day broken in the remote Western Australian Pilbara region, which is way up north, up in the desert, where the temperature reached 41.6 degrees Celsius in the middle of winter. And I got to tell you, I'm really scared about the fire season that's coming, because all of this heat dries everything out, which makes fire potentially more damaging. the Arctic and Antarctica, we're seeing some pretty crazy stuff there. So the Arctic is melting. So a blue ocean event is getting even closer, and that means the world will absorb more heat. So it will get hotter because there's not enough ice to reflect the heat. And Thwaites Glacier, which is something I always keep a close eye on, or the Doomsday Glacier, is breaking apart at its tongue. And Antarctica has just experienced an extreme heat anomaly in the middle of winter. And I was reading there's a big meeting somewhere in Chile, I think, where they're basically saying they think it's past its tipping point. Floods are everywhere. For every degree of warming, they estimate there is 7% more moisture in the atmosphere. And we're now at 1.58 degrees Celsius, warming above pre-industrial levels. And there's lots of people who are arguing about that. But the people I trust are saying we're at 1.58, so we're past 1.5. But we're also on track for 3 degrees of warming. So if you look at the floods now at 1.58 and know that as we get hotter, there's going to be more moisture in the atmosphere, the floods are only going to get worse. So if you are living in a flood zone, or even if you are on the edge of a flood zone, knowing that there's going to be more and more, it could be a good time to think about moving. We're seeing massive floods in Saudi Arabia. At least 60 are dead following some deadly flooding in India this last week. The driest place on Earth, the Sahara, is currently being hit by intense rain over the next couple of weeks. And of course, that water is going to go into the neighboring countries. In Yemen, over 9,000 families are displaced. And of course, Yemen's a war zone, so they're already in a pretty bad place. In Nigeria, 10,000 have been displaced and farmlands destroyed. So food's going to be more of an issue. And just yesterday, France and Italy got hammered by floods. A couple of interesting things. So one of the articles in the Telegraph, climate change is already forcing millions of people to migrate, and it will only get worse. Most of that migration is happening in country or in region, especially in places like Africa. But eventually they're going to start spilling over the borders, which is going to create a huge sort of political and geopolitical crisis. So we've got to think about that. We've got to prepare for it. You know, there's places that are thawing out where we could be building refugee cities, but our governments aren't doing anything about it. Another report, basically they're doing some not core, ice core, but land core research. And the impact of CO2 is worse than what they thought. And they think Earth's temperatures could increase by 25 degrees Celsius. So in Singapore, can you imagine a 50-degree day with the humidity? You know, so in Australia, in the middle of summer, it gets 40, 41, 42.
Here it's feeling 37, 38 quite regularly.
Yeah. So that's with the wet bulb, right? So, but just the actual temperatures. Iran, they've been seeing temperatures up in the 60 degrees Celsius range. These are unlivable. So, but one interesting approach to deadly floods is Kim Jong-un in North Korea. So 4,000 North Koreans were killed in recent flooding up in the north of the country, up near the Chinese border. So he killed 30 of his cronies for not stopping the floods. I know maybe if more countries did this, there'd be a little bit more adaptation activity taking place, because we're not preparing at all for what's coming. And, you know, you think of just rising sea levels and the impact on freshwater supplies, just the people living, you know, in areas that could be flooded. Are they aware of it? You know, and we've got examples all over the world now, some areas worse than others.
What we're doing is sort of makeshift as well. Like what would the artificial barrier that they're talking about with the Doomsday Glacier?
Yeah.
What's the deal with that?
How? It's the size of Florida.
To come and hammer it back together.
It's a plastic sheet, and the idea is it stops sort of the flows that goes in, that's breaking down the Thwaites Glacier.
We're going to use plastic.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's a form of geoengineering, right? And you kind of love the ambition of it, you know. But if you're going to do that, can we also stop doing the things that are causing the problem in the first place?
You
know,
think that would be it, right?
That's the thing. But I think the scientists who are behind those sort of projects and the geoengineering projects, and they're really interesting conversations going on around them. And there's people that are just like, nah, and there's people that are like 100%, let's go for it.
Yeah.
And you kind of sort of sit in the middle and you're like, there's no point doing anything if we're going to continue doing what we're doing that's creating the problem in the first place. But equally, whatever we do is going to cause, so we clean up CO2 in the atmosphere. We're going to have more heating because there's less sulfates to reflect the heat back. So whatever we do is going to have massive ramifications. And I think just as a global society, we've got to say, okay, let's understand all of these pieces and understand that we're going to lose thousands, 100,000, millions of people in the process, billions of people in the process.
Mm-hmm.
There's no solution, but we can, there are things that we can do. But the most important thing we've got to do is just green the planet again.
So if we're going to green the planet again, and we're going to decarbonize and reduce our emissions significantly, is nuclear an option?
Mm-hmm.
And so because, I mean, we all saw Fukushima, we know about Chernobyl. Shall I talk about this one?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a really interesting interview in The Guardian that interviews the physicist M.V. Ramana. And it starts with, "You'd be forgiven for thinking that the debate on nuclear power is pretty much settled. Sure, there are still some naysayers, but most reasonable people have come to realize that in an age of climate crisis, we need low carbon nuclear energy alongside wind and solar power to help us transition away from fossil fuels." Seems to make sense. In 2016, 400 reactors were operating across 31 countries, with one estimate suggesting roughly the same number in operation in mid-2023, accounting for 9.2% of global commercial gross electricity generation. But what if the optimism were in fact wrong and that nuclear power can never live up to its promise? Now, there's another take on this, but I'll continue with this one. That is the argument of the physicist M.V. Ramana makes in his new book. He says nuclear is costly, dangerous, and takes too long to scale up. Nuclear, the work's title reads, is not the solution. So nuclear is not the solution is the name of the book. The problems with nuclear are so obvious, he wagered, that they don't need to be spelled out. But with the guidance of his editor, he realized his mistake. Even if the contemporary environmental movement, which emerged alongside the anti-war and the anti-nuclear movements, there are converts. Prominent environmentalists, understandably desperate about the climate crisis, believe it is rational and reasonable to support nuclear power as part of our energy mix. The key reasons he says no to nuclear is that, one, perhaps most urgently, the risks of nuclear are too great. As an example, though, major malfunctions are rare, the likelihood of them happening is exacerbated by extreme weather patterns due to climate change. In Fukushima and Chernobyl, no one received a lethal dose of radiation. Rama says there's a definite relationship between your exposure to radiation and cancer, adding that there is no evidence showing that below a certain threshold there is no risk of cancer. The absence of evidence, he said, is not evidence of absence. Third point, though, nuclear creates fewer jobs than renewables per unit of energy generated. This is a tough one to swallow, though. And when it comes to renewables, jobs are more geographically distributed. As for supplying vast amounts of energy globally, nuclear cannot be scaled up fast enough to match the rate at which the world needs to lower carbon emissions. And four, finally, Ramana is keen to point out that the nuclear energy industry only survives because of government support. Through electricity bills and taxes, the public often pay a significant amount towards building and running nuclear plants, as well as storing the waste. So the waste is always a big deal. Governments also provide subsidies, skew electricity markets in favor of nuclear, and form such tight relationships with industry that they end up repeating their propaganda. To secure our future in energy, the world needs to reduce its material throughput by producing and consuming less, he says. However, I'd like to offer a slightly a skeptical opinion on that. He points out that the nuclear industry only survives through government support. Well, so does the coal and everything else, and petrol industry. I mean, if they were charged if you remove all the subsidy in petrol, the logistics supply in countries would just fall apart. Oil prices would skyrocket. because we're paying what we actually really do need to be paying for fossil fuels. But so that one's kept artificially low by pouring a lot of money into it. And this, honestly, I mean, I'm trying to weigh up two sides here again, okay? So I'm trying to see, I know that there's a challenge with nuclear, but nuclear does offer an opportunity to have basically carbon-free fuel. The waste, he said, was one of the things. There's waste. Okay, waste. The fact that nuclear creates fewer jobs. Oh, we got to keep the jobs. Well, what are the jobs doing? The jobs are drilling for oil, which we're all saying is the problem. so it's like maybe we can repurpose those people to doing something else rather than oil and put some of them in nuclear. And there's lots of other things that they could be doing from the nuclear side. Let me explain why. I listened to a financial chat with the CEO of Oklo, OKLO, and that's also its ticker. The fellow's name is Jacob DeWitt. I think I was listening to Jacob DeWitt. He's the CEO and co-founder. What these guys do is they manufacture emission-free megawatt scale. Well, that's nuclear anyway. Megawatt scale atomic generators. That's a new kind of nuclear reactor that is small, portable, waste and carbon negative. And what he's saying is he says the amount of waste that's in America, nuclear waste so far, would fill what he said was a super Walmart or a mega Walmart. And in other words, a giant 3 times IKEA-sized type building full of nuclear waste. He said all the nuclear waste in America would fill a building that size. And he says his reactors can use existing nuclear waste. And he's saying there's a lot of inherent power still in that waste that hasn't been used. It's like we've burnt a block of coal and we've thrown out the remaining coal in our fire, but that could still be burnt somewhere else, for example, kind of. And so he's saying he can use the nuclear waste, the existing nuclear waste, and power America for 150 years. With that, so there's that much waste in there that can be utilized by new forms of nuclear that reduce that waste capacity. Waste is still going to be an issue at the end of it, but those reactors, one of the things that that was in the article that the physicist Ramana was saying was that it takes too long to build a giant reactor and it takes too long to scale up everywhere. So I guess businesses are trying to find solutions to these problems. What are the problems? This guy identified too long to scale. He's solving that problem. Too much waste. He's utilizing the waste. So still the biggest problem I think that would be unanswered is government willing to legislate and willing to risk a failure, and the failure and the cost to all the people of around that failure incident would be the big challenge. But we've just finished talking about war, going, the cost, but that one's still a big risk.
A massive issue around nuclear that isn't being discussed, and I think I've heard this guy's story. I know Bill Gates is with one of his businesses have designed some nuclear reactor that's much faster to build. My issue around nuclear is we're seeing it in France, we're seeing it in other parts of the world. You can only have nuclear where you've got water to cool the reactors. And a lot of the nuclear reactors are at risk because there's not enough water to cool down because of drought. So if we can have nuclear in a warmer world, fine. But are we designing nuclear for a warmer world? And based on the lack of foresight that we've seen in our leaders in all business areas for the last 50 years since Reaganomics really came into power, and sort of the whole consumertron culture that was created around the world, where we're all in overshoot, we're all taking too much from the earth. Anything that is proposed, just as long as they're showing us in the long term, this is how it's going to operate within what is coming at us as a global society. Because, even if we all move to nuclear, it's still going to get hotter. Yes. Like I said, We take all the CO2 out of the atmosphere, it's going to get a lot hotter because we're
Yep.
taking the sulfates out, right? So whatever we decide to do, it's the path with the path and the reality. And you've got to remember the other thing. If nuclear is not maintained by human beings, it's not a long period of time before it starts to break down and it explodes, right? So if one area of the world puts nuclear in place and it becomes too hot to live and everyone dies and everyone has to evacuate, what happens to that facility? Who's, is it going to, and what happens?
Dismantling policy,
Right.
I guess.
So it's just that. We've got to think it through. And where the money is being spent, where the money is being focused, the fossil fuel industry, talking about, all of the fossil fuel capture technologies, and it's everywhere in our media, and hydrogen as a solution. It's all there in our media, and it's dominating the conversation because the money behind it is so huge that the other conversations that are saying, no, we shouldn't be doing that, they're not getting the same attention because they don't have the millions and billions of dollars behind them, right? So we don't have a balanced conversation. And that's my biggest concern about where we're going. The people, and we haven't got time for these guys to fail. We haven't, and I think when they first started doing this, I know everyone thinks that they're big evil people, and I think when they first started to do this, their timeline was much further in the future, and they didn't even think they'd be alive when this moment happened. Well, this moment is here now, so it's time to come together and say, okay, what's the best path? And it's not shareholder happiness and price. It's none of that. Like, the global economy is going to suffer. Like, we're not going to be able to protect the global economy. Collapse is on the way. When you really look at it, this is where we're going. So how do we move forward? And in the best way possible, understanding that we're not going to be able to save them all, including ourselves.
I mean, my thing for the nuclear side would be, let these guys try. It's the same with wind technology. Let them try. With the wave technology, let them try. Because if they can come up with something that can contribute to the decarbonization and looking at the cost at the outside of what they're emitting,
let them try. But as long as we're spending the most of our energy and our finances on the things that we know are going to work, right? And that's nature restoration.
But I think the reality is that if the United Nations and all the countries of the world said, okay, guys, we got to stop X, Y, and Z, I think the probability of that happening is tending towards zero. Unless, because a pandemic was very real. I mean, we talked about this once before, a couple of years back, I think. The pandemic, you could see people dying in front of you. It was because of that. Therefore, everyone took action. This one, stuff's getting hotter and people are still fighting the information war about why, rather than doing something about it. People are dying because of the weather, and they're just, act of Godding it. I think the church should be defending God in this one.
Well, the Pope's talking about it. He said this last week. There was a headline: "The world is sick. We need to do something about it." But let's move on. So the media. So in last few weeks, I've been sharing some stories, basically talking about the media spotlight. So, media ownership, billionaire media, how the media makes its money, and social media was a big part of how that all changed. So a reckoning is starting to happen. It's a good reckoning, and we're going to talk a little bit about it more when it comes to the US election, because I think it's relevant. But just this week in the Australia's ABC, the ABC chairman, which is a public role, it's an important role, was talking about the sliding trust in media. So the trust in the media has been diminishing for more than 20 years. So it seems like we're taking a long time to get to the point. But no matter what you think of the media, how much you hate the media, how much you distrust the media, whatever you think about the media, it's such an essential tool in a flourishing democracy, and we've got to really get our minds around turning this around. So if you're not doing it, make sure if you can afford to do it, make sure you're subscribing and paying for media that you actually value. And there's some brilliant media out there. I subscribe, I think, to about 10. But But the other side, of course, of the media is social media, and we all know what's going on there. Everyone I talk to, they're all stepping away. People are tired of it. They hate seeing the anger and the hatred and the division. People are so reactive. It's frustrating. But there's a lot of stuff going on social media. And when Pavel Durov, the founder of Telegram, was arrested in France, Joe, I was very curious to hear, did you have any thoughts on that one?
Well, I mean, I just thought Russian Elon Musk. Enough said, right? I mean, that's kind of the idea. I mean, it's a better tech in terms of what Telegram's made of, but I do know that fundamentally, what Telegram's kind of set up to do as well is to maintain encoded or encrypted communications and privacy and stuff like that. So a lot of that really has to do with well, the freedom to think, right? And I do understand that part of it as well. So I can figure out, I can understand why he's probably inclined to refuse to do what they were asking him to do. As to whether or not it's a good idea to defy legal requirements, that's a whole different story. But I can understand where he's coming from. I don't see him exactly as the Elon Musk, as in I think Elon Musk is a little bit more inclined to have an agenda, whereas I think Pavel Durov is more of an absolutist in terms of free speech and the freedom to think what you want and the freedom to communicate what you want.
Yeah. So, he's basically come out today. He's finally made a statement, and he thinks the arrest in France is misguided. But it seems like sexual trafficking, child trafficking, arms, all that sort of stuff. So things. But let's go on to Musk, because
I mean, he's not doing that. It's just that his platform is complicit.
He's not doing enough to stop
that
happening.
Yeah,
exactly, right. But social media. So Elon Musk, he's obviously been in the spotlight, especially in the last couple of months. When you think about the tone of X, and I'm still on X when most people have left, the UK riots, the responsibility that was put on his shoulders for that, Brazilian ban on X, and how he's really trying to control that story, public perception of that story, the whole switch towards the Republicans, the super fund, the PAC that he's putting money into, how he's speaking about or supporting posts speaking about Kamala Harris, like the one where she's dressed in the red. It's an AI generated image of her in like the red communist outfit. He's doing a lot. So, Joe, months ago we've been talking about him, and you said he's the man everyone wants to hate. But I actually think we're dealing with a different situation now. I think something's happened to him, and I think his daughter is part of that story. Have you seen her going after her dad now? So she's the transgender daughter. I think that's part of the story. But I don't know. He's not the same man. When his mum said "do no evil," it's like, what are you up to, mate? I don't get it.
Well, I think Elon Musk is doing what many men eventually do, which is we get older and grumpy. And I think that's what happens, right? Maybe we're old and grumpy, and we can do as much grumbling and stuff as we have the power to. And he has a lot of power. So he's. I think you get to the point in life where you go like, I've got no more F's to give, and I think as on the edge as we found Elon some time ago, I think that was Elon with a little bit of control and a little bit of holding back. Because I was just listening to another podcast about how he was, a few years ago, and the Elon from a few years ago would have been more likely to say there's good people on either side, which sounds like a familiar phrase, right? But now he's not so inclined to. He's picked a side, and in terms of, I can understand from his perspective. Look at me having empathy for a billionaire, but he can see that they're problems with the world. I mean, he's committed to the idea that this world is screwed up, right? He's committed to the problem. He's committed to the idea that this world is so bad that we have to leave it and we have to try and find another way to have mankind survive. So he's got a bit of that already in his vision of the future, and he's got, you know, nothing more dangerous than a man with a big dream and the ability to fulfill it, right? So I think he's in that particular space, and I think he's being challenged in a way at a time when it's either going to happen or it's not, right? And he's very concerned about the woke virus, the woke mind virus. I share some concerns about the woke mind virus, to be honest, because I think not all of us voluntary, or at least not all of us has signed up to the same idea, but a lot of us end up in the same team, if you know what I mean. So you know, so he's decided, okay, I'm gonna fix what I can, and the way I'm gonna fix it is I'm going to engineer this solution. So what I'm really worried about is the amount of money that's going to be thrown into the election this year by Elon Musk. I mean, you know, forget the other billionaires, but here's someone who's prepared to put his money where his mouth is. And in terms of really being prepared to lose money on a bet, he's shown that he's very happy to do that. Or not happy to, the word's not happy, but he's willing to do that, and he's done it, you know.
Yeah, my mate Bergie, that's one of the things I was thinking about. What about Trump's idea that Musk will join his government to lead an efficiency program across all of government? Yeah,
Yep.
so that's one of his things. He's ready to join.
You know, I heard about that, and I, you know, it's one of those frightening ideas where you go like, oh, let's put someone you don't really think is gonna to make things work, try to make things work. There's something about the way X is hobbling along right now that still kind of works, as in, like, in terms of what X is doing as a company. If I just look solely at the way X works, or maybe even at some of the other stuff that they do in terms of the how SpaceX is run as well, right? It is actually run on hyper efficiency, right? The idea is, let's run it at a level which is close to breaking and get the most that we can out of it. And if you think about this, just again, I'm not fanboying or anything like that, but I'm just putting the idea out in terms of how you should consider it, right? If the US government could be run in that fashion, on the edge of maximum efficiency, instead of what it currently is, you might think it will work pretty well. I mean, think of American healthcare and how much better it would be if you could do something about how efficient it was, right? And that would be it might be a very uncomfortable day for the administrators and everybody else who's used to the way things are, but it could end up with something that could be desirable on the other side. But you know, it's one of those things, right? As the law of unintended consequences could very much be like what's happening in the UK. I mean, the UK's healthcare system theoretically is a great idea, but you don't want to be sick in the UK. You know what I mean?
Not now.
No, not right now.
But you know, because they took money out of the system and made it inefficient, right?
It's about the efficiency as well, right? So I say, if you run it too efficiently, too lean, it breaks. It has no room to sort of do its thing, and that's what like SpaceX tends to be run that way as well. It does go right to the edge, and it does what it can with what it has, but it doesn't overspend on things for the extra insurance sometimes, right? And so you literally get a kind of cutting of corners, which happens as you're trying to push the limits that way. So it's a scary prospect, but at the same time, it's a vision, right? Can you imagine America running, perhaps the entire country government, right, running on 30% less a year? I would think that's a very interesting idea as a business America.
Right. I remember sitting down with one of the top analysts, and they were talking about, I think it was big data back then, right? and they were talking about what you could do with big data. And I was sort of sitting down, I was listening to them, and I'm like, okay, so let's look at a country like India, right? So big data, you got your cameras out, sort of predicting crime before it even happens, you know. But India as a country, it hires a lot of people in police roles. So if you bring in technology and you don't need the people, what jobs are those people going to do? So I think there are things where you need humans, and there's things where technology is a solution. So efficiency, 100% agree with you, but you can't look at the technology solution without understanding the human impact. Just go to a supermarket. You don't have, you know, the lack of human interaction, which is creating loneliness in society because people have got no one to talk to. You know, they're opening up, you know, counters all around the world where people can go and talk to somebody behind a counter because that's the only conversation they have all week. So technology solutions, and the tech bros, you know, there's not all of them. There's a big group that are not behind Donald Trump, but there's a big group, especially the crypto guys who are. And I sort of sit there and I'm like, so your ability to make more money, increase your billions, and introduce your technology and do whatever you want to do is okay at the expense of women's rights, LGBTIQA plus rights, social justice issues. Like they don't care about them because that's not on Trump's agenda, right? When you look at Project 2025. So, you know, there's a humanity story and there's a technology story. And the two have to come together. And I don't believe that Elon Musk is the person that could be the one that could help us do that.
No, I agree with you that based on his agenda and based on him doing it and pushing it, he's not going to get that. He's not going to get that done, right? I mean, but I mean, I'm sure you get the same feeling though as you go like, well, if only he was more on our side, right? If he was more about inclusivity, if he was more about all those other things, and that was what he was about, you'd
But
like to have Elon Musk on your side. Sorry?
But is that a side?
Well,
Like,
I think it's a side. It's a side he's found himself on because you know he's a okay. So what you do in technology and what you do in all the things that he's doing right now is you are pushing the limits, right? And he talks about you know rules, regulations, stuff like that, and you can see as you're trying to build something that things can be very much in the way of progress. If you think about like for instance Tesla trying to get into Singapore, they weren't. You know, they didn't come in for a very long time because things weren't they weren't set up so that they could be in Singapore and could run. And if you think about what held that back, it would have been just regulations about things that had to be put in place or some kind of a structure for electronic vehicles. And we took quite a long time as a country to actually get on board. Once we did, of course, we turned it on and we're moving forward and we're already making money with COEs, right? But it's
COEs
that
is COEs for the non-Singaporeans.
Certificate of entitlement. It's basically a rego for 10 years.
Yeah.
It's about 100 grand.
Well, when you say regio, the Australians are thinking $300, right? But it's a lot. Yeah, it's
10,000 a year. Yeah.
The open category is just gone over 100,000, and I think there's the lower category, the cheap one is something like 74,000 in the last exercise. So $74,000 gets you the piece of paper that says, "Okay, now you can start to buy a car."
Get 3 of them quick.
But can I just take you back to the concept of progress, right? So, and you were talking in sides, and to me, it's not a side. It's just so. I think we're at the point where Elon Musk, Donald Trump, they're all symptoms of the runaway progress we've been making for the last 50 years. And in all of that progress, we haven't stopped to sit back and go, but what is progress? What is progress? What does it mean?
Yep.
Are we bringing everybody with us? And with artificial intelligence, I mean, the fear that so many people are going to be left behind, right? What is progress? What does it mean? Who's benefiting from it? And, you know, we've seen the extreme wealth disparity growing and growing and growing, right? So do we want someone like Elon Musk, who obviously believes that we keep going on that trajectory where a few win and everybody else loses? Or do we say, okay, so this is the direction that we want to go in, right? So how are we going to take care of all the people who can't get on this ride with us? Because then, so that's when things like universal basic income come into the conversation, right? So to me, it's not it's just a broader conversation about where are we going, and we can't keep going the way we're going because we're just going to head off the cliff because the earth can't carry what we're demanding of it. So,
Yeah.
you know, and is Elon Musk the answer to that problem? I don't think he is. I think he's the opposite.
He might not be, and at the same time, though, the solution, you know, speaking from a perspective on the other side, right? We're also thinking about, like the stuff that we, you know, a lot of our friends are calling progress. Is that truly progress as well, or is it now a different situation now where now we are in charge, or we are more looked upon in greater respect and status? Our point of view is more, you know, whatever it is, right? So it's why I say side is everybody inadvertently starts off in some way identifying with something. We're just that. We're just that way. We are either, you know, we have to belong somewhere, right? And it's whether or not when we see ourselves as being othered, right, if that feels comfortable. And you know, there's a lot to be said about how people feel othered now in the world as well. I think you know, we talk about some of this toxic masculinity and stuff like that. You know, it's this strange thing, but you know, like nobody really wants to have time to have empathy for the sad billionaire, right? We just feel that there's no place for that. And
well, apparently, high status males should be running a republic.
Yeah, I mean that's
testosterone.
one. Yeah, that's one of the stories that came out, right? So could you imagine a world where the it's only the alpha males, right, run the world, and it's
well, they are. That's why everybody's fighting.
Well, are they?
Well,
are they? Yeah,
fighting. Are they fighting?
No. Is it just alpha males running?
No. It's not alpha males running the world, but those
I don't think so.
Are in control of fighting.
Yeah, but we're talking about Sudan. If they want to have peace in Sudan, they need women at the table with an equal voice, right?
Yeah.
GDP of a country grows when there's equality, equality and diversity, right? Different viewpoints, different opinions. So a South African, and is he Afrikaan or is he of the British variety? I think he's Afrikaan, right?
I thought he was Afrikaan.
Yeah, I thought so too. Do you know, Joe? Anyway, so there's a mindset within the Afrikaan culture, right? And it kind of feels like it's coming out in him as well. But I think, you know, there's groups called the Elders. Nelson Mandela set it up. People like Mary Robinson are part of it. I think we need people of wisdom sort of coming forth, and I think we need a bigger global conversation. So when I think about what I stand for the Burmese refugee that used to be my neighbor when I was living in Thailand, living in a tin shed, going through extreme floods, losing everything, as well as living in extreme heat, when basically in a building where they were being cooked after working all day building luxury villas for rich people. That's who I speak for. I want to live in a world where we say what we've built isn't right. It's not fair. The majority are not thriving. And how do we change that? So that's the world I live in. That's the side I'm on, I suppose, if you want to give it a side. I don't think Elon Musk is the person that can answer that, because I don't think he sees it, even though he grew up in South Africa, where, you know, they've got these huge encampments where people are forced to live. I don't think he sees it. He's not building a fairer world.
You know, I think there's always a thing about where you start in life and where you begin your journey, right? So yeah, I agree with you. I mean, he probably doesn't and hasn't seen that whole thing. He hasn't been at the bottom. People have this idea that he's a self-made man. Yeah, but it always is about your first step and where we start off life, right? So he's I think his father was a mine owner or something like that,
and his mum was a supermodel.
Well, there you go.
Was she?
So
apparently.
All right. So, like looking at the
Maybe not
time.
super, just a model.
Speaking of misinformation,
Well, no. I mean,
let's-
according to
let's
whatever
just-
I looked up, looking at Afrikaner is the language. Afrikaner is the person.
it's also a culture within South.
Yeah,
There's
Afrikaans
British.
speaking population of Dutch origin. He's
exactly.
certainly Dutch and British mix. He's a Dutch and British mix.
Right. Remember our mate Denise that he came on the
Yeah.
show? You guys, yeah. So he's got some amazing stories about being brought up as an Afrikaan. But anyway, Trump, U.S. elections, Afrikaner, is that it?
Afrikaner, yeah.
Okay, all right. So let's just sort of just have a quick final chat about the election. So I never thought that Donald Trump was going to win this election. Sean Law says, "Oh, there you go. You put it up. Is an alien even by South African standards?" Okay, all right, yeah. Even when Biden was slipping in the polls, because I don't just read the news. I'm also looking at the conversation that's going on around social media, right? So I didn't believe that it was ever going to happen that Trump would be elected as a president again. And I knew something would change, or the energy of the conversation would change, whether it was getting behind Biden or something else. I didn't see the Harris Waltz thing coming. I think it's certainly been a positive, like the momentum, and we're not at the end. It's not over till it's over.
Hang on, when you said you didn't see it coming, what do you mean by that?
As in, like that combination of human beings going out there in the world, spreading a message of love, and it's been nice, right? After everything that we're saying. So, I mean, there's so many things we can say here. Obviously, a lot of people thought I was nuts, and I've been talking to a lot of people who I know follow politics, and especially the U.S. election, who didn't think there was any chance that the Democrats would win. But I definitely I would be surprised if they didn't. I'm surprised that we're looking at some of the stats. It's 48 Democrats, 44.9 Trump. I'm shocked that still is in play.
So close.
To that extent, I really am. And it really is so close. But one of the stories that came out this week was this Boston Globe columnist called Mike Barnacle, and he was on Morning Joe. Morning Joe pops up for me every now and again now. And he basically just said, we have a damaged, delusional old man who, again, might get reelected to the presidency of the United States. He said he is deranged. He says, you say things in public that you wouldn't repeat on television or in front of your children. How did we get here? Then he pointed the finger at his media colleagues, right? Donald Trump can say whatever crazy things he wants to say about submarines and sharks and electric batteries. But it's not really covered. They're not really talking about it. And to me, the media role in this is, the way they went after Biden after that debate and his age. And, just today I was watching a video. Trump is doing he's talking in front of a bunch of economists, and they're asking him some quite sort of serious questions. And he goes off into this, like, it's just nonsense coming out of his mouth. It is verbal diarrhea. So, like, I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I'm with you in that it's shocking that after what happened last time that he would be even there. It's basically because he's effectively an influencer, and he's got a following that gives them guaranteed momentum, and they're very noisy. So I'm the thing about the polls is I don't trust polls anymore, because
no one does.
Yeah, well, because they always seem to be interesting to talk about and then later wrong. And my guess is those people that are vocal about Trump will say it to the pollster, and those that are vocal about Harris will say it to the pollster. But there's a far bigger portion that aren't saying anything. And that's the one that is the big percentage shift that we're not seeing. We're thinking it's close. I hope so.
Well, it's close.
I hope it isn't. I hope it isn't close.
I think the Democrats need to win both. It needs to be an absolute landslide so they can just get on with doing what they need to do. We've got Sean, the two impossible scenarios that you spoke about happened. Trump got shot.
Yeah.
Just that story, right? And Biden stepped down. The Elephant Party has lost their script on Harris, which is absolute. They don't know how to do it. I'm very much looking forward to listening to the debate, which is just a few days away. It's maybe next week. But just to say, and she's got to perform, right? Could you imagine the pressure that's on her shoulders?
Yep. The thing is, and she's got to come across as being capable and strong. And message of love is great, but you've also got to back it up with strength on policy. She was an attorney general. I mean, she should be strong. The thing I'm most disappointed about with America at the moment is that they had 4 years to rethink and rebuild the Republican Party, and they didn't do it. I mean, it just seems like they didn't do it. And we're back to 8 years ago. It's
got it.
It feels like if they lose, then they can't put him forward again, and then they're going to have to do their rebuild.
I mean, if he's even alive in the next election, I mean,
well,
that's the other thing, right? So JD Vance is so unpopular. So people are voting for Trump, who will probably die because he's not a healthy man, and I'm not one of these people that will cheer that on. He will probably die while he's president, and then JD Vance will become the president, and he is despised within the Republican Party. So Bergie's saying Trump still leads on the two most important issues, economy and immigration. Just go and listen to that conversation he's having today with The Economist. It's on YouTube. Just go and look it out. But also immigration, right? So he's leading on immigration, and yet he stopped and asked the Republicans to stop moving on an immigration policy. So I don't know. It's kind of what is it? I mean, the Chico dusted buffoon.
Yeah, I love that.
There's a real difference between there's a real difference between what the audience is perceiving and what actually is being done, right? I mean, whether you got your finger on the scale, and Trump manages to get away with that. Again, back to the start of the show, we're talking about misinformation, right? Because of all that stuff that's going on, where we can't believe, we want to go back to what our beliefs. What we act on instead of truth. We don't look for the truth. We just assume that what we believe is true, and that actually it's very useful for someone like Trump, right? So if you like what's happening though, which I think is refreshing, is at least now what we're seeing is at these big events. That there is a faltering actually of the support for Trump, and people are walking out of his events, and that's just something that is quite amazing. And he's acting out like a crazy old man. And I mean, look, he makes the ultimate choice in a vice president, which it's one of the things that we've been discussing is, does Trump really just want to lose so he can be the lose? He can be the guy who didn't win again. You know what I mean? As in, like, because there seems to be a lot of money in it, right? And in terms of all the money that's been raised when they when there's it's like when they lose, they win financially. They get the milk. They get the milk that cow again. So it's almost like he's playing for the loss, right? And then wants to play on the whole basis of we should have won, So this is a deep psychological thing, but because in terms of what he was doing, what he's been saying, I mean, I love, you were talking about the debate a while ago, and I actually began to laugh a little bit because what's happening now is the Trump side wants the rules that they had for Biden to continue, as in, like, they want the microphones to be turned off when it's not your turn to speak. And many people, all of us, kind of know that's because they don't want Trump to go off the deep end, because he seemed to do quite well in the Biden debate, and partly because Biden and him look so good. but I mean, there was also the fact that his microphone wasn't on. He wasn't able to go off the rails.
Although when he was debating Hillary, the microphone being on, he used it to very, very powerful effect, right? And really unsettled her. So I was surprised by that demand, because actually it did work then. But at the same time, he's put the people around him, his handlers,
more unhinged.
no, right? And it's Kamala would have a chance. It's my turn. That real sort of shut up. It's my turn to speak sort of commentary that we've seen more and more by women in powerful positions. But that's it's a look. To me personally, look, 30%. The MAGA supporters, I get it. They love him. It's people talk about it as a cult. I don't know anyone in that camp. I have met people. I don't know them personally, but I have met people and talked to them. It's been very interesting listening to what they think. I try and do that, but I don't get it. I don't get it. And I do think the media is failing so badly. And they're failing so badly in so many areas. They're failing on Trump and not covering him fairly the way that they did Biden. They're failing on the environment. They're failing on the economy. They're failing in every way. And I think the media is definitely coming for a reckoning. But the nonsense and the disrespect, and it's going to get so ugly. And I think everyone's got to get ready for that. We're already seeing some really, really revolting things. And we've got to get ready for more of that, because it's going to get uglier and more desperate in the coming weeks. And it's not going to be pleasant.
Feels very much like we're living in the decline and fall of the Roman Empire.
Doesn't it?
I was gonna say earlier on when you're talking about the Sudan, right? I was just thinking about this and going like, well, who's gonna go in and rescue the U.S. when they're in the civil war, right? I mean, that's it's one of those things. Whose side do you pick? Who's supplying arms for who? Oh, hang on, Russia. It's one of those crazy things, and yeah. I mean, I really hope, like you do, that this is going to turn out a landslide. One of the things about polls, by the way, which is still remarkable to me, is that it's still heavily reliant on landlines. So polls do reflect very much that aspect of it, because if you got a mobile phone, you're very unlikely to take a phone call from an unknown number anyway. And that's just a reality of life. But it is largely based on landlines, so that's going to skew things a little bit. And then in terms of the way statistics work, they probably will have enough weightage to give enough weightage around. But in terms of opinion and stuff like that, I don't think you're going to get many young people responding. And that's both ways, by the way. It's not just going to be on either side. People tend to think that the young are going to go with the Democrats, but there is actually indications that a lot more of the young men, are attracted to
white men,
and actually blacks and Hispanics as well. That's there is something about there's something more than just about the race, and there's something more than just about the privilege. There is something else about that. There is something to be explored in terms of how a certain part of the audience does feel like it has become lesser, and and I think Trump does a good job speaking up for them, and whether or not it's going to be the way it's actually going to pan out, he does represent them. So he's in some respects he's the bro, right? And I think if you think about some of the bros that we have in our life as well, they're not well known for saying the best things, but you go like, he's our guy. So I do understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, no, I think it's a problem in society that we have to address, male and female. But, we've got some problems and we need to fix them, and we need to look them in the eye, is something I always say. And we're not facing up to it. And young men going extreme right is a big concern. Civil war is an interesting conversation. There's a lot of different views on that. Most people think that most Americans are too comfortable in their air conditioning with all of their luxuries to sort of head in that direction. But will there be civil unrest? Virgin's talking
about for about 10 minutes. And then when the bullets run out, and they go, run out of bullets. Well, I'm not going to the shop. I'm going home.
Yeah, exactly. Trump, Bergie's talking about Trump's pathways to revolution and authoritarian government. And this is the other thing. There's some other things that are going on under the radar, not just voter suppression, but also, Trump's comment, "You'll never have to vote again." What does it mean? What's in, what's at play here? And is America strong enough to hold the line with this threat wherever it's coming from? Because it's not Trump, it's behind Trump. It's the people, the puppet masters who are playing the game, right? So we were going to talk about authoritarianism. We were going to talk about mpox, bird flu, COVID, but we figure we've gone for an hour and a half, 40 minutes. So
I wouldn't
been a
mind
couple
hearing
of
a thought
months.
on mpox though for a sec, if you've got any thoughts.
Well, as I understand, and this is having a conversation with someone who is working with infectious diseases. It's not a really big problem in the sense that, well, famous last words, right? I mean, way back in 2019, someone said the same thing, I'm sure. Not a big problem because of a number of factors. The nature of the disease makes it something that doesn't spread as easily, and because it is as serious a disease as it is as well, it doesn't spread and then spread again, because it's bad news for whoever
It
gets
wipes
it.
out the host.
Yeah, so it in that sense, not so great. But the threat really that the way Singapore is looking at it anyway, is that we want to make sure that it doesn't prevent the rest of the medical system from working. And most people, when they think back about COVID, they keep thinking that we're trying to keep the disease at bay, and you don't want to get COVID. And it's not totally about that. It's about the fact that when you have that many people affected by a disease that takes up a lot of attention, the rest of the public healthcare system actually suffers because of it. So, in the midst of COVID, people died of things that you don't normally have to die of, because there wasn't the capacities, because you get to the point where there's just no more beds, right? And I used to see the numbers on the other side of things. And in Singapore, despite how well prepared we were getting to the point where we had 10 available beds and that kind of those kinds of numbers. And
Yep.
it got kind of scary, right? And
Yep.
more recently, I mean, look, if you step into an A&E in Singapore right now, it's about a 24-hour wait at least before you get your bed. I mean, look, this is my experience from a month ago. It could have been changed radically since then, but more or less, it's not again as wide open as people maybe imagine it
And
is.
that's
And so
without a
if you
pandemic.
add the stress of a pandemic, you add the stress of an infection and having to make big arrangements, it's going to be tough. So
So
the attention right now.
Why is it 24
Sorry?
hours? Why is it 24
It's
hours?
just capacity. It's just capacity. It's just it's the time before they can put you in a room. So I mean,
Yeah, but
as in like they could see you in A&E within a few hours, but if you need to be warded, they might not have a bed for you
Right.
for about 24 hours.
They're
And
building
I
more
think it's like,
hospitals, but we've got a rapidly aging population.
well,
Right, okay.
there's all kinds of things related to that. But if you think about that, so that's the real risk in terms of any kind of new major disease. So mpox, the way we're dealing with it right now is the frontline staff are being vaccinated. We can use the smallpox vaccination actually, because it does provide you some protection from mpox. We didn't need smallpox vaccinations. That's why we had some reserves. But I think the minister was talking about here in Singapore, if we had to do an island-wide everyone vaccinated for mpox, we still don't have enough as well. So it's one of those things. We have to keep it at bay, just watch what's going on, and play the safe game. But if I can take a step back and say it's not time to panic.
No.
I know, again, could be famous last words, and you've always teased me for that, Andrea. But
No, I don't think it is. I don't think it is. I think bird flu's got much greater potential because people are saying, "Oh, it's a pandemic," and I'm like, well, mpox isn't a pandemic because we've actually already got the vaccination for it. So we're so much further ahead than we were with COVID. We're so much further ahead than with the bird flu. I think that's a much greater risk and it's also a greater risk with the birds dying on such large proportions, which will ripple out and impact the ecosystems, which will impact our food and the weather and so many other things, right? But I'm not concerned, and it's a physical touch. Mpox is physical touch versus airborne, which, you know, is a different thing. So I'm not as concerned about it either. But it's interesting to watch it.
It says two things to me. It says, you know, countries need to be thinking ahead for hospital space, and I know Singapore is building more wings and more beds, but that's got to be something that's factored into the investment into infrastructure. But the other one is investing in facilities that can produce vaccines and pivot to whatever is required, and that almost needs to be local, or at least centralized somewhere in a facility that can do it. We saw it in COVID, that we all ended. It was like Independence Day. We're all sitting there with aliens everywhere, going, "When are the Americans going to fix this?" I mean, that, and it shouldn't be like that, right? So, yeah, it was like irritating, actually, that we had to hope that somebody else would do it.
Yeah, because the centralization of it.
You get handcuffed by that.
Yeah.
Well, if I can speak for the scientific community, it was actually, COVID was a global effort in terms of everything that was being done to keep it at bay, and the way everything was being uploaded. It was the most unified response we've had to any one kind of threat. I think in the history of the world, as in like that they had a database where every single bit of sequencing that was done was put up into this database, because it was part of that. But in terms of the technology that moved it along, it was only because it had been moving along for about 30 years that it actually came to the point where its moment came. Because this was it. This was the thing that would push it along. The vaccines wouldn't have come without COVID. It would not have been able to push across the line without that particular need, because and actually, because of COVID, the future is going to be much better for us, because we're going to get closer to things like vaccines for cancer, which seem like a crazy thing, but there are going to be more vaccines for cancer, more personalized medicine, because now we know it can be done. You know, it's changed the world, and it's also at the same time made the world a worse place, because I've met more people than ever now who don't want vaccines.
But there was one moment that I thought, that's the world right there. And that was when, I think it was in England, they'd come up with a version of a vaccine, and they were stopped from giving it to everybody by a commercial interest to say, no, come in through us, let us distribute and brand, and we'll make sure it gets out to everybody. And that was just commercialization of something that was intended to be given away for free because there was a humanitarian need globally. And there is a logical argument to defend that decision, but it just felt like the world came in and went, I'll take a piece of that. And that's the thing, that I think that if countries can have their own scientific community that is tapping into the pool that you were talking about, and able to try and create and learn from that creation, but being able to produce, and part of the sharing means that once we've got the final thing, I can produce it in my one, and I don't need to wait for you to send it over and hold me to ransom. You know,
but I just so there's different aspects here, right? So what Joe said, I thought was very powerful. The global scientific community came together, worked together, collaborated together at a scale they've never done, and it's opened up doors to lots of beautiful things, right? Brilliant. So, and then there's the middle bit, which is the commercial bit, right? Who makes money from what they're doing? And that was one of the areas that really, really annoyed me. The big companies, Pfizer's, right? They never did the right thing by the majority of the people of the world, right? Mpox is a classic example. There is a vaccine. We haven't put enough vaccine in the place like the Congo where it was needed. And now they're all rushing to do it when it's already broken out of the country, right? So that could have been solved a few years ago. That's annoying, and it's a financial decision. But then the third thing is, in a pandemic, if everyone does the same thing for the same amount of time, we've got a better chance of being able to overcome the pandemic. And we didn't do that. Like, I'm listening to what you were saying about Singapore's preparation for Mpox now. If every country on the planet turned around and looked at Singapore as a model of what to follow in a pandemic, I can guarantee you we would be able to deal with whatever's coming our way. But we don't, right? And we saw that. We saw that
I think they probably do, and they have the argument, and then everyone goes, yes, let's do it. And then what happens is people get bigger houses. And they don't do it.
Well, but you know what I mean? But like, if we want to deal with pandemics, it's simple. We all have to do the same thing at the same time. You know, if for 2 months, when we saw COVID was on the march, for 2 months, the whole world just went, okay, let's stop. And let's just really see where we are and see if we can stop this. It would have been over within 2 months, maybe 6 months. But we're still, you know, there's for every 40 Americans, a person's got COVID at the moment. Like the deaths from COVID at the moment. The DNC was a super spreader event. We're still in a COVID pandemic, but no one wants to talk about it anymore, right? It's just crazy. The lack of logic in the world just drives me nuts. We need more logic. Anyway, what's distracting you apart from studying, Tim? Is there anything that has caught your attention? I've got a couple of doozies.
I mean, studying was the big one. My brother moving from London to here was obviously a huge family one, which has been great. And you know, so that's going to be a huge shift when the rest of his family get out here in late December. They came out for a visit, which was nice, and then they're preparing for the move. So that's been great. I mean, for me though, it's for me, actually, the most interesting thing that's happened is I feel like I've done a 30-year circle. You know, I studied psychology at university, and now I'm back in a psych class using it for pastoral ministry and going out and sort of counseling people in old folks' homes. And I find it just bizarre the way that life does its thing. And I just find it amazing. So I'm just in this sort of wonder moment at the moment as I'm going through it and feeling very privileged to be able to serve in that way and finding it a sort of a brave new world as well.
Nice. You must be a giant when you turn up into those old people's homes in this part of the world.
They do look a bit ominous. I've got to make sure that my hair is not blonde and I'm wearing a flowing white gown, or else everybody might think that's their moment.
Yeah. So how tall are you? 6 foot?
6'2".
Yeah. So that's
it really doesn't help when you arrive with that short guy behind you and you keep turning back to him saying, "Hey, Frodo, come in, Frodo."
No, thou shalt not pass. His job is to hold the plate. Okay, but I mean, yes, I find it a really nice. It's been really humbling in a proper way, not in a false social media way, but in a proper way. And it's been a really nice journey. And the subjects this semester have been really interesting. I mean, ethics has been one, which I was rattling off some stuff before, and this side of psychology used for ministry in this particular way has been really great as well. Just the grand scale of the effort that goes out there that is just unsung is so amazing. So it's a good team to be part of.
Nice.
Cool.
Joe?
Well, in a grand tradition, in the midst of signing up more ideal clients, people who are really good, who want to be great, I've been going back to some sources which I never saw the first time round. So I still haven't watched The Sopranos, but I finished off Mad Men, which turned out to be quite an interesting journey for me. And currently, I'm a little bit, I won't say surprised. I'm a little concerned about how much I relate to the main character in the series I'm watching, Dexter.
Oh my goodness!
Okay. Wow.
I know
You'd
what to
love
get
to
you
go
for your birthday. Glad wrap.
I'm gonna talk about 3. So recently the new season of Emily in Paris has been released, and it's a really interesting thing. So sometimes I spend a lot of time reading really hard stuff. So if I sit down and watch TV, I don't want to think, and I don't want to care. So Emily in Paris is like a little tickle in my brain, right? People just can't stop talking about it. And I was thinking I need to do a meme. Emily in Paris to me is like pineapple on pizza. If you enjoy pineapple on pizza, you don't talk about it. You just enjoy it, right? But everybody else wants to talk about how ridiculous it is that you have pineapple on pizza. Why doesn't everyone just shut up about Emily in Paris? If you don't want to watch it, if you don't like it, don't watch it. But leave it the people who do watch it alone. It's like liking Taylor Swift's music or not. I don't care if you don't like it. It doesn't matter. So we're all a little bit over. We get a bit too involved in things that just don't really matter. But Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris is on Netflix, and it's a little movie, and it is magnificently beautiful. It's about this lady who's she basically cleans people's houses. No, it doesn't. It's not a spoiler. Okay. It's part. And she decides that she wants to go to Paris to buy a dress from Dior, and it's just beautiful. And if you just need to feel faith in the human spirit, it's about a person who is just kind no matter what the world throws at her.
Yeah.
But the most interesting thing that I've watched is Chaos. Have you seen that advertised with Jeff Goldblum as Zeus?
No.
Right. Yeah. So it's really cool.
Zap you.
Yeah, it's really cool. And it's told in modern times. So he's on the phone trying to call his kids, the other gods. Married to Hera, his sister. The actors that they've got in all of the different roles, like Eddie Izzard is one of the Fates. It's just it's like it's a show that needs to be told. And Tim, this is not a criticism of religion. It's talking about organized religion and the arrogance of the gods and their disdain for humanity. That's basically the essence of what it's about. But at the same time, I think it's a bit of commentary of what's going on in the world around religion, not at the core of what religion is and what it means to individual people, but the collective institution. So I think it's very clever. And the other thing I'm really, really surprised about is
it's like hacking mega churches, is it? That sort of thing? Kind of. I've got
the
great.
Extreme.
Yeah.
Sounds a bit more like Succession for the gods.
Yeah. But do watch it. But does Singapore not censor its TV anymore?
It rates it. So if it gets put on the air, as in we have it here, it gets a rating. So I'll have to look and see what the rating is. It could be
21.
It could be M18 or 21. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's stuff I wasn't expecting to see. And I was like, oh, okay. Anyway, so watch Chaos. It's a good mind bender. Steve started and he couldn't finish it. The first show, it was too weird for him. But it's I liked it. I like mythology. I like history of religion.
Oh.
So it's very good.
Anyway, can I just share one last bit of news, which I think is going to give you a bit of good. I mean, it's good news for you, I think. You remember how Ted Lasso kind of wrapped up? Well, it hasn't. So there's a fourth season.
That is good news. Tell me what happened at the end of the third one.
Yeah, it's kind of like
I'm not going to tell you how it ended. It's okay. You go and watch the show, and I'll never do spoilers. But
it hasn't started yet, right? They've just signed.
No, it hasn't. But they just launched that. They agreed to it. It's one of those things where they kind of agree that it's going to be only 3. And
I'm a bit annoyed because I like things to finish.
Yeah. I think the word
Ted Lasso is nice. I do enjoy it, but I kind of want it to end so that I don't have to watch it anymore.
Well, don't watch the new Beverly Hills Cop then.
Don't or do.
All right, guys, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you for joining us. It's been great. Sean, Pete, Vicky, and Julian with some really good chats and questions and comments. And, come and join us on the show. We've got one date that I'm looking for a guest now. And I think we've already had someone who wants that date. So a full calendar of guests up until the end of the year. But yeah, really good to be back. Good to talk about it. None of it's simple, right?
Man.
We got 45 seconds to come in under 2 hours.
All right, we're going to do it. And see you in a couple of weeks. All right, bye.
Bye. Bye.